The government spent 8 years teaching Marcus how to survive anything. Then it put him on the street. And on a Tuesday morning in October, in a vacant lot between a dollar store and a chain-link fence, in a suburb where nothing unusual ever happens, he showed his neighbors exactly what that training was worth. He was 51 years old. He had a diagnosis nobody had helped him manage. He had an eviction nobody had stopped. He had months on the street that every program, every voucher, every caseworker with 40 other cases had failed to end. He had no money, no tools, no blueprint, no truck, no hardware store run, no emergency fund. He had knowledge, and knowledge in the right hands does not look like nothing. In the right hands, on a cold Tuesday morning, it looks like a man crouched in a vacant lot, moving with a precision that stops 3 separate neighbors mid-stride, arms full of groceries, mouths open, because what they are looking at does not look like desperation. It looks like engineering. Stay with me, because what you are about to learn is not a survival tip. It is an indictment, and it starts with a question that no one in charge wants to answer plainly. Before we talk about what Marcus built, we need to talk about what the system offered him instead. The United States Department of Housing and Urban Development counted 32,882 veterans sleeping without a roof on a single night in January 2024, trained by the most well-funded military in human history, given a number and a cot in a warehouse with 80 strangers, a caseworker with 40 other cases, a phone line that rang out after 5 in the afternoon. And here is the number inside that number. Of those 32,882 veterans, with all the federal programs, all the press releases, all the vouchers, roughly 42% were not in any shelter at all, not transitional housing, not a cot in a warehouse, cars, doorways, drainage tunnels, the margins that cities build and then agree not to see. The system said, take a number, wait for a bed, fill out the form. Marcus said, I already know how to do this. Because the Army does not teach you to wait. The Army teaches you to build. And the document that has kept American soldiers alive in jungles, in deserts, in mountain ranges for decades, a field manual called FM 2176, later updated as FM 305.70, and now ATP 350.21, contains one of the most quietly devastating sentences ever written by a government agency. It reads, "A common error in making a shelter is to make it too large. A shelter must be large enough to protect you and small enough to contain your heat." Read that again. Small enough to contain your body heat. The entire philosophy of modern housing runs in exactly the opposite direction. Bigger, more square footage, higher ceilings, open floor plans, more surface area for heat to escape through, more utility bills, more mortgage. The housing industry built an economy on the premise that bigger means better. The Army, having studied what actually kills soldiers in the field, having spent decades learning what the human body needs to stay alive when everything else is stripped away, arrived at the exact opposite conclusion. Small wins, tight wins. The body is the furnace. Your only job is to build a room it can actually heat. That was the knowledge Marcus carried. Across 8 years, across the diagnosis, across the eviction, across the months the system chose not to count him, that one counterintuitive, field-tested truth pressed so deep into his muscle memory that it did not require instruction from his brain anymore. It was just there, waiting. The first thing Marcus did that Tuesday morning was not pick up a stick. The first thing he did was stand still, 5 full minutes, just looking. The neighbors watching from kitchen windows read it as confusion, maybe medication, maybe worse. He was neither. He was running a site survey. Specifically, he was working through what Special Operations Forces call the 5 Ws, a checklist that SERE training drills into soldiers at every level until it stops being a checklist and becomes instinct. Wind, water, widowmakers, wood, wildlife. He checked wind direction first, because a shelter entrance facing into the prevailing wind is a cold air funnel aimed directly at your face while you sleep, and hypothermia does its worst work when you are unconscious and your body has already stopped shivering, which means it has already stopped trying. He checked the ground slope and low points for drainage, because pooled rainwater will wick through insulation before midnight and steal heat you cannot afford to lose. Then he looked up. This is the one, the single thing that separates trained from untrained almost immediately. He looked up for widowmakers, dead branches held in the canopy by tension, balanced on surrounding wood, waiting for a gust to bring them down onto whoever is sleeping below. An ordinary person walks into the woods and never thinks to look up. A trained soldier looks up first, every time. Not because they were told to that day, because they were shown once in training. What happens when you forget? And they never forgot. After 5 minutes of stillness, Marcus knelt and pressed his palm flat against the soil. Not sentiment, physics. The Army Survival Manual is specific. When at rest, you lose up to 80% of your body heat to the ground beneath you. Not the wind, not the cold air, the earth. The ground is a thermal sponge and it will drink your warmth all night. Slow, patient, invisible, until your core temperature drops into the zone where your body stops regulating itself properly. Hypothermia does not need a blizzard. It needs a damp night, an uninsulated ground surface, and a body that does not know what is happening until it already has. Marcus knew. He knew it the way you know things that were taught in conditions where the alternative to getting it right was not a poor grade. So before he built a single wall, before he raised anything an inch off the ground, he planned for a floor, 30 centimeters of dry leaves, pine needles as falls, and folded cardboard, a layer to break the thermal bridge between his body and the earth, 30 centimeters of trapped, still air. It costs nothing. It changes everything. The structure he built is called a debris hut. Chapter 5, paragraph 40 of the United States Army Survival Manual. The manual's own language for warmth and ease of construction, the debris hut is one of the best. When shelter is essential to survival, build this shelter, not one of several options, not a fallback, this shelter. Marcus found a ridgepole first, a long, straight branch at least 9 feet, propped at one end on a forked stump at waist height, the far end resting on the ground, the spine of the structure. Everything else would hang off it. He lashed it with strips of plastic torn from a tarp near the fence, wrapping them in a spiral the same way you would apply a field dressing to a wound. Tight, overlapping, no gaps. His hands moved in a pattern they had repeated so many times in training that they did not require instruction from his brain. His brain was already on the next step. Then the ribs. Branches angled up against both sides of the ridgepole like the bones of a fish, creating a narrow wedge barely wide enough for one person lying flat. That narrowness was not poverty. It was not improvisation. It was precision. A shelter sized to fit a single body. Traps heat the way a sleeping bag does, by keeping the air still, by keeping it close, by giving your warmth nowhere to go. Then the lattice. Finer branches woven horizontally across the ribs, cross-hatched by hand, creating a mesh to hold the insulation in place without letting it compress inward and close off the air pockets that make it work. And then the thing that made the first neighbor stop dead on the sidewalk. The debris, armful after armful, dry leaves, pine needles pulled from the trees at the back of the lot, dead grass in bundles, packed onto the lattice from the bottom upward. And here is the detail the Army is explicit about. At least 1 meter thick, 3 feet of debris on every surface, not because it looks impressive, because dead air is the best thermal insulator on Earth, Every pocket of air trapped between those leaves is a tiny, still heat reservoir. 10 million of those pockets across a wall, 3 feet deep, performs thermally better than standard residential insulation. The science is not complicated. Air does not conduct heat efficiently. A lot of trapped, still air conducts heat very poorly. 3 feet of dry leaves is a vast quantity of trapped, still air, and it cost Marcus exactly $0 because it was already on the ground, where no one had bothered to see it as anything other than yard waste. When he finished the walls, he built the bedding inside, another 30 centimeters of the driest leaves he could find, packed before he sealed the final layer of branches across the top to weigh the structure down and prevent wind from stripping the insulation away overnight. Then he pulled a bundle of debris to the entrance, his door. You drag it behind you when you go in. The cold stays out. The interior temperature of a properly built debris hut occupied through a full night can sit 20 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than the outside air. No fire, no blanket, no gear, just the man inside and the dead air holding his warmth around him. Just physics and the memory of 8 years. But Marcus didn't stop at the hut because the army also taught him fire. Not the open, smoky, visible from a distance kind of fire most people build. The army teaches fire the way it teaches everything else. Maximum output, minimum waste, minimum signature. He dug a Dakota fire hole, 2 connected underground chambers, one for the fire, one upwind about a foot away, connected by a narrow tunnel at the base. The upwind chamber acts as a bellows, pulling air underground and delivering it directly to the base of the fire, where combustion is most efficient. The result is a fire that burns hotter than an open campfire, while producing a fraction of the smoke, using a fraction of the fuel, and leaving almost no light signature at ground level. Soldiers use it because it is hard to detect. Marcus used it because it works. Then the reflector wall, stakes driven into the earth, green logs stacked horizontally between them, gaps filled with packed dirt to hold heat. The wall faces the fire. All night, it absorbs radiant heat and gives it back. A radiator with no electricity, no installation, no monthly bill. The person sleeping between that fire and that wall receives warmth from 2 directions simultaneously, direct from the flames, reflected from the wall. That is not folk wisdom. That is documented Army field engineering, tested in conditions where the margin for error was measured in lives. By early afternoon, a thin column of smoke rose from what looked like a small hole in the ground. The structure behind it looked like it had grown from the earth, and Marcus was finishing the door. A child from 2 houses down walked over and asked what he was making. Marcus showed her. Her mother came. Then a man from across the street, 2 tours in the Navy, stood for a long time without speaking and then said, quietly, that he recognized it, that he had heard of this, that he had never known anyone who could actually do it. This is the thing about real knowledge, not textbook knowledge, not certification knowledge, knowledge tested in conditions where failure has a specific cost, and that cost was not measured in grades. When you see it deployed, even if you cannot name the technique, even if you have never seen it before, some part of you knows you are watching the real thing. These neighbors were not watching a man improvise desperately out of materials nearby. They were watching mastery. They were watching someone who had been taught by professionals at extraordinary national expense, with extraordinary rigor, perform at exactly the level he had been trained to perform. The gap between what Marcus knew and what they knew, between Army-trained survival craft and the average person's complete inability to stay warm outdoors without $100 of gear, is not Marcus's failure. It is ours. If this story is making you angry, if you are starting to feel the full weight of what it means that this man was built by the government and then left by it, you are feeling the right thing. Subscribe. Because we are not done pulling on this thread. So why don't the rest of us know what Marcus knows? Because the market made it irrational to learn. When a tent costs $40, it becomes economically rational to stop teaching people how to build one with their hands and start selling them one instead. Mass production made the old knowledge seem obsolete. We didn't lose it in a disaster. We traded it away, quietly, for convenience, and then forgot we'd made the trade. The problem is, the market only works if you're in it. Marcus wasn't in it. He wasn't in it because of a diagnosis nobody treated, and an eviction nobody stopped, and a system that counted him correctly on one January night, and then handed him a number and a wait time and called that care. The 42% of homeless veterans sleeping entirely unsheltered that night were not unsheltered because there weren't enough sleeping bags in the world. They were unsheltered because we replaced the knowledge of how to survive without the market with a market-dependent system to catch everyone who fell out of it, and then called that a safety net and agreed not to look too closely at the holes. There is also this. A debris hut costs nothing. The shelter industry, the camping gear industry, the emergency housing industry, none of them profit from a technique any trained person can execute with their hands in a vacant lot. Zero-cost solutions don't have marketing budgets. They don't have lobbyists. They don't get written into the emergency response frameworks designed by the companies that sell the alternatives. The knowledge survived in the Army manual because the Army has a different bottom line. But the Army's graduates, the people who actually carry that knowledge in their hands and their muscle memory, came home to a system that had no plan for what they knew and no plan for what they needed. The 55.6% reduction in veteran homelessness since 2010 and is real progress. It is also a number that means, on the night they counted, 13,851 veterans were still sleeping outside with no shelter of any kind. Progress and failure are not opposites. They can be true at the same time, about the same people in the same country. Marcus is both. He is the Army's success. He survived. He built something that made trained people stop and stare. He carried 8 years of field-tested knowledge through the worst months of his life and deployed it with calm. He is also the system's failure because none of that should have been necessary. Not 1 minute of it. Here is what you can take from this. The Army Survival Manual is a public domain government document. Search FM3-05.70 or ATP 3-50.21. Read Chapter 5 on shelters. It was written by people whose entire professional purpose was keeping soldiers alive in conditions with no margin for error. You do not need a military background to read it. You need a search engine. Know the 80% rule. The ground beneath you is your primary thermal threat in any cold environment, not the wind and not the air temperature. The ground. Any layer of insulation between your body and the earth, cardboard, leaves, a folded blanket, a wooden pallet, fundamentally changes your odds. That fact costs nothing to carry and might be the most practically valuable thing you learn today. And carry this. Marcus didn't invent anything. He remembered what he'd been taught. He remembered it with enough precision and enough calm that a vacant lot in October became something that stopped his neighbors in their tracks. That is not a footnote in the story of veteran homelessness. That is a man who was given extraordinary knowledge by the institution that trained him, abandoned by the systems built to protect him afterward, and forced to prove on a Tuesday morning in a suburb where nothing unusual ever happens that the knowledge was worth something even when the institution wasn't. The Army built him to survive anything. He survived. The knowledge was never lost. It was left behind in the people we trained, in the men and women we paid for their service, and then sent home to a system that was never built to catch them. It's still there. In every veteran you've walked past without knowing what to make of them. in every person working with a precision you couldn't name but recognized somewhere deep as something real. If you believe these people deserve not sentiment, not charity, not annual awareness campaigns, but real structural accountability, you know what to do. We are going to keep pulling on this thread. There are more stories like Marcus's, more gaps between what we built these people to do and what we've allowed their lives to become. Those stories deserve to be told, and we're going to tell them.